listeners, the podcast about transatlantic security and international relations. However, today we brought you a special episode.
Yes, it's today, the 20th of December, and we're your regular hosts, Vava.
And Dimitri,
So, in this episode, we would like to use today's launch of the Boeing's CST-100 Starliner spacecraft as a pretext to discuss a topic which is becoming more and more important for international relations, namely spaceflight. We will analyze current developments in space exploration and manned spaceflight, discuss prospects for the future, and analyze spaceflight's impact on modern international politics.
Yeah, exactly. Sounds very intriguing. So let's jump straight into the topic.
Let's do this.
So, and today we are talking about, first of all, the launch of Starliner by Boeing. And I guess it's like very huge step for Boeing. And so how do you see this, Vava? Why are they doing this?
So basically, NASA, after the retirement of the space shuttles, basically lost all possibilities of sending humans into space. After the fall of the Soviet Union, there was no need to achieve great goals in space. There was no enemy to beat in space exploration. So basically, the Americans gave up on sending humans into space.
Yeah.
But recently, they figured out that, well, maybe we should be kind of independent and we shouldn't solely rely on Russians for bringing our astronauts to our space station.
Which is very, very interesting topic.
Yeah, so basically, they decided to cut costs that they will employ private companies for their manned spaceflight. So what they did is they employed two companies, SpaceX and Boeing, to construct a manned spacecraft, which will be affordable. And yeah, that's what Boeing did today. They launched their Starliner spacecraft, which is supposed to be bringing astronauts to the International Space Station. The mission wasn't quite successful. They had some problems with entering the correct orbit, so the spacecraft is all right, but it will not be reaching the International Space Station anytime soon. So this is a huge milestone because private companies are entering what I would call a new space race right now. And Boeing and SpaceX are in the lead, I would say.
Yeah, but how do you feel about like Boeing in terms of like entering this kind of like not crowded field, but the field mainly dominated recently by, I would say, SpaceX?
Well, I guess they want to catch up to SpaceX, who have already made huge progress. They already sent their spacecraft to the International Space Station. It was the Dragon spacecraft. It went to station, docked successfully, returned, but afterwards had some problems and exploded while testing. So that's why SpaceX still didn't carry any humans to the space station. So those two companies are, both ahead in the race. But they're not the only ones who are currently trying to bring people into space.
And this, let's go to another question. What about Blue Origin?
So Blue Origin is another private company founded by Jeff Bezos, the famous Amazon owner. So he intends basically to use his company purely for commercial purposes. He wants to bring tourists into space and occasionally do some contracts for NASA as well. So this is interesting because we have so many private companies entering space exploration, which was unthinkable like 30 years ago.
Yeah,
the field was dominated by the US, Russia, Soviet Union, China as well. And, well, this is one of the reasons, I would say, for the emergence of the sort of a new space race.
Yeah, I mean, but do you see it's like a new space specifically in the US, or you see like internationally?
It is very much international. For example, we should take a look at the Rocket Lab company, which is based in New Zealand. They're currently developing smaller rockets used mostly to bring satellites into space. Not humans or anything, but they're doing it very cheaply with new technologies. Basically, their rockets are 3D printed. Many of the parts are 3D printed. So it's a very much international trend. So New Zealand is a prime example here.
Yeah, I mean, and there are a lot of like small private companies that have a contract just like dedicated to like their work to like the space industry.
Yes, exactly.
So it's very important to say. So yes, but I feel like it's it's like very big thing now in the US, but it's not like very big thing in other countries. I would say even in Russia, in China. Okay, they invest a lot in their like space capabilities, but it's still not like the same amount of money that the US. I mean, not the US well, not the US government, not only, but private companies invest in this field.
Well, yes, this is true. The US has always had the biggest budget in terms of space flights. But they are not the only ones currently in the space race, which I will say. Basically, the sort of a new Cold War between the US and China takes its toll again on this space flight. So basically, the Chinese are also investing quite a lot in their space exploration. They have their Long March rockets sending people and sending probes into space. The Chinese were the first ones to land on the so-called dark side of the moon, and they were the first ones to grow a plant on the moon, which is a huge development in space exploration.
It is.
And they're also investing in their space stations, and they have their plans for space exploration. So I think, considering especially President Trump and his attitude towards China, he basically wants to, beat the Chinese in space exploration.
I mean, that's what like Space Force is all about. I mean, it's another but let's talk about military domain a little bit later,
yes,
maybe.
We will, for sure.
Yeah, but let's now concentrate on just like on this topic of space exploration. But what's like, if we talk about this new kind of space race, what's like the prime goal, the prime objective of this like space race?
Well, there are various reasons. We have, I would say, SpaceX played a huge role here, and Elon Musk. He basically inspired a lot of people. He's basically this visionary guy who paints space as the future of humanity. And especially
Mars,
Yes, but there are various other factors. For example, I think Donald Trump plays a big role here. He has always been this guy who loves attention, who loves just look at any of his like hotels or anything, having this huge name on the buildings. He likes to be in the center of attention.
Makes history.
And to make history, exactly. So Donald Trump was the first president since the end of the Cold War to propose an increase in budget for NASA. And he has been very interested in the proposed moon missions. Well, not proposed, but planned currently. They're already a go. The missions to the moon are a go. So that's that. This is why Donald Trump is pushing for the Artemis program, which, for those of you who are not aware, the Artemis program is a plan to bring humans back on the moon by 2024. But, I think all those factors also influence the public opinion. I think, like, the public opinion is more and more interested in space exploration, which you can see, for example, with so many science fiction movies coming out right now, which are more and more scientific. They're not your, Star Wars with sounds in space, etc.
True.
They're more and more based on actual science. And they're also, I think it's vital for humanity right now. We're facing climate change. And some people say, well, if we screwed up our planet, let's move to the next one and let's not repeat our mistakes here. And also, there are some predictions that we will run out of natural resources pretty soon on Earth. And, if we had the entire solar system for our disposal, we will basically solve the problem of natural resources very, very fast.
Okay, but let me play like the role of like devil's advocate, because people say that's a lot of investment, there's a lot of money, but actually the colonization of Mars is like very, very unrealistic because it's not habitable. And in order to make it habitable, you need not only like a lot of resources, but it's just not like possible. That's what like a lot of scientists like make this argument. So it's like just a waste of money and probably some commercial adventures of Elon Musk in order to like catch attention of the public. But do you think like it's actually possible to colonize Mars?
Well, it is. First of all, let's look at the International Space Station. It's basically
but less space station. It's space station. That's one thing, but Mars is way more like another level of complexity.
Well, yes and no, because there are some challenges that come with Mars. For example, the distance. And there are some things that will help you on Mars. For example, Mars has an atmosphere. So in case of some, your base getting dehermitized, you will not explode. Mars has gravity, which solves some problems the astronauts face on the International Space Station. So basically, if we talk about like colonizing Mars and turning it into a second Earth, Well, it's not possible right now. It will require maybe 300, 400, maybe 500 more years of human development. But having like permanent settlements there, it's totally possible.
But do you think we need nuclear weapons for this? That's like Elon Musk's idea.
Well, he had an idea that you could
nuke Mars.
You could maybe nuke Mars and then warm up the atmosphere, but I'm not sure like anyone would allow him to do this.
That was his answer to a lot of like scientists who are actually very like skeptics like about like this idea. They say, well, I mean, it's not habitable. I mean, and you can spend like billions of dollars, and Mars won't be habitable just because like it's like a very different type of planet. It's actually very cold for human beings just to live there. I mean, in terms of like just atmosphere.
Well, it also depends how we define habitable, because well, space is not habitable as well, and we have the space station, and people live there all year round. So it depends on the definition.
It's still a lot of money, but I mean, you can imagine how challenging to send all the rockets to Mars and back, especially back. I mean, it's doable probably in like the next 2 decades to send a rocket there, but to get it back, that's a question.
That's true. I mean, we have sent rockets to Mars many times, even in the 60s. So. True. So getting there is not a problem. It's staying there is the problem.
Staying there is a problem.
Yes.
And how you feel like in terms of timing? What's your like prediction about? I mean, I guess like Elon Musk's prediction now is to get to Mars by 2030.
Something like this.
Yeah, yes. Something like this. Or like pessimistic by 2035 or something like this. But how do you feel about this? Like,
well. Elon Musk has always been a bit too excited about his projects. So we see developments that they're really working on their Mars spaceship, and they're doing progresses. They're doing test flights, hovering flights. So, well, it's still a long way to go. 2030, it's 10 years.
Yeah, a lot of things can change.
Considering that during the Cold War, people went from sending a little probe into space to landing a man on the moon in just a matter of basically a little more than 10 years.
It was like a big.
It was hugely, basically from the first space flight to landing a human on our body. It's really impressive. Yeah. So I'm rooting for him, and I think he can do it if he doesn't screw up anything.
So I guess we're wrapping up this section, and
yes, let's move on.
Moving to some security problems of space exploration.
We will.
So turning to the problem of security, I guess now space, as like in 60s and 70s, is becoming more and more important for governments, especially for so-called like great powers like Russia, China, the US, and so on. But how do you feel? Is it like a field for cooperation or more a field for competition?
It all depends, as always. Yeah. We see some amazing cooperation right now in terms of space exploration. Yeah. The International Space Station is a prime example. There's, I think, 14 countries that are taking part in the space station program. It includes NASA, it includes Russian Roscosmos, it includes the European Space Agency. We have people from...
It's a big achievement for the whole humanity.
It is probably one of the greatest so far.
How you can cooperate.
It was some of the segments were built by the Russians, some by the Europeans, some by the Americans. So that's a field for cooperation. The Artemis program, also NASA is not doing it alone. The Orion spacecraft that they want to send to the moon is built in 50% by NASA and 50% by the European Space Agency, for example. Okay. So it's not just an American mission. Yeah. And also the Russians are taking part in it. They're going to be building parts of the Gateway station. Russians are very experienced in building space stations, way more than the Americans.
Yeah, they are.
Basically, the entire International Space Station builds of Russian technology for space stations. So Roscosmos is taking part also in the moon excursion plans. Yeah. But then again, we see room for competition.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of like this, the return of like great power competition and all this stuff, I guess it's becoming more and more difficult for them to actually cooperate and find common ground, so to speak. Because
this is true.
Yeah, now it's becoming like this bone of contention in terms of every country kind of feels that a big power feels that it needs to have superiority, or some kind of like advancement in this field in order to outpass like its adversary.
Yes, that's true, and this is what leads to the militarization of space.
Yeah.
So basically, since the Cold War, space was a useful utility for warfare, and it is still today. So many of the great powers possess military satellites all over the Earth. Well, when we bring the numbers in, you'll see how much our orbit is cluttered with satellites. The US has 137, Russia has over 100, China as well, and even France has some military satellites. This includes navigation satellites, meteorological, communication, everything.
Yeah, because navigation satellites are like the most important that you.
Yes,
they are. You can have like.
They are.
I mean, yeah, I guess like this question is about like the US has this idea to build up, so to speak, like the kind of new Star Wars in terms of like this idea to build like defense system in the space that can actually prevent any kind of like sort of missile strike.
Yeah, that's true. And well, ever since for example, when GPS was first introduced, I think it was first used in the Gulf War.
Yeah.
When they basically surprised Iraqi tanks by crossing a desert. The Iraqi thought, you cannot cross the desert because there's no navigation points there. You cannot navigate. And the Americans were like, we have GPS. We don't care. So GPS is vital. Surveillance is vital. Communications is all vital for warfare.
True.
And many countries are also developing ways of destroying enemy satellites.
And this is what's called, like, I guess in like modern terms, because like militarization of space, it's not only like satellites, but to put some like kind of weaponry that can knock the satellites. This is like the main the fragile like component of this like.
Yeah, right now in space we don't have any weapons. Any weapons. We have only like passive military
like satellites. Yeah.
But this might change. For example, the US, I think even in the 70s or 80s, they developed a missile that was capable basically of shooting down satellites. And it would be fired from fighter jets. I think the F-15 was firstly supposed to fire those missiles. So this like fighter would go up to, let's say, 20 kilometers, well, that's too high, maybe 15 kilometers altitude, and fire this missile to destroy a military satellite. But this poses huge risks. Because if any one of you has ever seen the movie Gravity, you can see what destroying a satellite in orbit might cause. This is basically what the Indian state did. They basically shut down all of their satellites, and the debris came pretty close to the International Space Station. So had they hit the International Space Station, there could be a huge mess of the orbit. Many of these satellites could be destroyed.
Very big problem.
It would cripple our internet, cripple our communications, and not to say about military installations. So space warfare is very tricky. I think that if any country decided to destroy an enemy satellite, they would probably do it in a different way without blowing it into pieces. For example, the U.S. Air Force has a very secret plan. They basically have a small shuttle. I think it's called X-37 or something like this. I'll have to check on this. But this is basically a little miniature space shuttle. It's super classified. We only know that those shuttles ride into space like every couple of years, and they stay in orbit for a long, long time. And we have no clue what it's doing over there.
Yeah, I mean, the US is very, very advanced in terms of satellites. And
this is actually a military craft. It's not launched by NASA. It's not operated by NASA. It's not operated by any private company. It's operated by the Air Force. It only rides on some private rockets, but when it's in space, it's only the domain of the Air Force. So we have no clue if it's armed. It could be because it's super classified. We only know that it exists because some of fans who watch rocket launches see, oh, what's this? So many people have theories that this spacecraft is basically used to take down enemy satellites by basically flying up to them and capturing them and bringing them down.
I mean, the same is about, for example, surveillance satellites. I mean, the Americans still don't reveal what kind of like type of satellites they have in the space, and there's like a very big debate about that they use the lenses that they use for Hubble telescope.
Yes.
They use them for actually surveillance right now, which is like a very big problem in terms of like, I mean, they publicly don't agree with this statement, but like a lot of specialists actually pinpoint that it's the case.
Yeah, and well, and about the politics in space, it's interesting that we see a lot of cooperation, but for example, Russians, Europeans, and Americans, they are more or less cooperating despite the politics back on Earth.
Yeah.
But the Chinese and Indian space programs, they're on their own. So India tries, basically, they're developing their own means of sending humans into space. They want to be able to do it on their own, and the Chinese are doing it all the time. Using basically technology based off of the Soviet technology,
but which is definitely very hard for both parties because they're not so advanced in terms of like building space equipment.
Yes, they have lots to catch up to, but China is doing amazing progress.
Yeah, I mean,
India is quite behind still, but China, I think it's a matter of maybe a decade until they catch up to the West.
So let's turn to another topic.
Yes, sir.
Which is
the future and politics.
Future and politics of outer space. So, and the last part of our discussion is the politics of outer space. And how do you feel, Vava? Do we still commit to the Treaty of Outer Space of 1967, or we need some new stuff? Bring some new stuff to this treaty.
Well, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 it was signed basically. It's a UN treaty that was signed during the Cold War.
Yeah, which is very, very, very important.
Yes. So the times were way different, and nobody even thought it's possible yet to go to Mars or even further. People were making their first steps basically in spaceflight. So I think all countries agreed to it back then because they said, "Oh well, there's not even a possibility for me to build a base on the moon. So why should I care?" Right now, it's changing. So we already see that space is being militarized. We have the space forces. We have military satellites, of course. We have secret covert U.S. Space Force. Right now it's still the Air Force, but Space Force soon. Spacecraft flying into space, which could be carrying weapons. So maybe this treaty would need revision. Maybe it should, because more and more countries will want to place weapons in space, especially if they, let's say, they build colonies on different planets or moons. They will want to protect them.
But that's exactly like a very interesting part because we first need to break down, like for people to get a grasp of this idea, how this colony is going to be organized, like by legal terms.
Yes, this is very, very interesting. The same Outer Space Treaty basically says that space is a domain of all the nations and that no country should be allowed to claim any part of space for themselves. But let's
the same with this Antarctica.
Basically, the same solution with Antarctica.
Yeah.
But now let's think that SpaceX is successful and they build a base on Mars. And let's say they build it in a perfect location where there's a lot of water and basically hydrogen, everything that you would need to run a colony. What if other countries also wanted to have a colony on Mars
very
and wanted to have a very good location on Mars because those natural resources are not everywhere? So if they build such an outpost, would it be claiming the ground for yourself?
That's an interesting question.
So now if we have the US, where basically anyone who's born in the US becomes a US citizen, what if we have a child born in an American colony on Mars?
That's another point. It's very interesting thing to discuss. I guess a lot of legal experts now kind of trying to figure out, and that's why we need probably some amendments to the treaty.
I think we do,
to specify all this kind of stuff, which is like way more difficult taking into account like current situation in international relations.
Yeah, it's getting heated.
Very, very heated. But I want to like return to another point of this treaty, which is the prohibition of nuclear weapons in space, which is like very, very important from a lot of perspectives. But
I guess Elon Musk would want to change that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how he's gonna do this, but
well, theoretically, any intercontinental ballistic missile already violates this treaty because many of those missiles actually go above the so-called Kármán line, which is basically the so-called border of space. So if you send any ICBM out to enemy, you're already violating the treaty because you cross the space.
It means a kind of war.
Yes,
that's another thing. I mean, I guess like it's a very interesting question first for space exploration because there are some sort of ideas about constructing of some type of engine that requires some sort of nuclear energy.
Yeah, there are already engines that run on nuclear power. So these engines work a bit differently. They basically heat fuel using nuclear reactors, which is then like thrown out of the engine, which makes propulsion. And I guess if let's say the Americans wanted to power their colony on Mars with a nuclear reactor, I guess this could cause some anxiety from different countries. Like, oh wait, those guys are building nuclear installations in space.
I mean, it can lead to war probably because I mean a lot of countries, for example, Russia is very clear about this. I mean, and there is like no way some other countries. I mean, like any country has no right basically to have any sort of kind of nuclear equipment in outer space.
I mean, not nuclear, but nuclear weapons. For example, the Russians have many satellites that are powered by little nuclear reactors, which is funny because most of them were launched during the Soviet Union times, and they're not operational anymore, but still in orbit. And from time to time, they fall to Earth. There was a story like a couple of years ago, maybe in the 70s or 80s. Or maybe, I don't know where exactly, but basically a post-Soviet satellite crashed and didn't burn entirely through the atmosphere and crashed in Canada. And it contaminated quite a large area because it was basically radioactive. And the Russian government paid some reparations for this to Canada for the cleaning operations. So yeah, basically you can see that nuclear power in space is dangerous. And my predictions would be that at some point, one of the great powers will break this rule of not placing nuclear weapons in space.
I mean, I kind of know what this power is going to be.
We don't know. It may be the US. I mean Trump's presence is very unpredictable.
I mean, the US has advantage. I guess it's not like even in time of Donald Trump. Maybe it's other generations.
It could even happen a bit later. Yeah, I mean, as soon as the first country breaks this rule, other people will follow. And then I think we'll see some revision of the Outer Space Treaty for sure. Maybe there will be restrictions, or you cannot have more than, 100 nuclear warheads in space or something like this. But it will change for sure. I'm sure that space will be militarized because as it becomes a bigger part of human civilization, as we know, humans are good at turning every part of human life to warfare.
It's same with colonization back to 15th and 16th centuries.
Yeah, basically when the colonization started, it was well, let's say it just was a race who gets
once you have some trade between celestial bodies, so to speak, you have to protect this commercial route.
Yeah, when you look at how many colonial wars there were between powers, European powers for colonies during the colonization period, I can see this repeating in a different setting than being in space.
Of course. And I guess like final question, people were very excited about space in 60s, I guess in 70s. They thought like the humans would eventually, it was a matter of decades when they land on Mars and they're going to conquer the whole like space. And that's why we have so many space movies, so to speak.
We do.
But finally, I mean, nothing like happened in terms of like expectation did not really meet. And probably a lot of people saying, we kind of probably experiencing something the same. We have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of investments, but it doesn't actually mean that it's still any kind of achievement in space. It's a big step, but probably our expectations would meet reality, so to speak, in the future. How you feel what can you say about this?
Well, back during the Cold War, there were hopes and expectations. People said, oh, wow, so now we land on the moon and then we should go to Mars. For example, the chief, the guy who built the American rockets that went to the moon, Wernher von Braun, he was a huge fan of the idea of going to Mars. and he even wrote about it back in the 30s,
Ooh.
how he could colonize Mars. But then no concrete plans were made to do this. There were only ideas, but there was no program started. There was no research going into this. And currently, we have this research. We have the Artemis program, which includes building a space station around the moon, which is already designed to serve spacecraft going to Mars. We have SpaceX, who are basically right now building their Starship craft, which is supposed to be able to go to Mars. They're building it right now before our eyes, and they're doing some test flights, etc. So maybe not all of our expectations will be met. I think it's kind of undoable to settle Mars permanently
straight ahead
in the coming like 20 or 30 years. I think we might have some outpost that works like the International Space Station with maybe 10 people living there. The crew's changing every 2 years, something like this. But we need more time before we'll have like a settlement over there. I think first will be scientific outposts, maybe some like military surveillance listening or some military installations. Yeah. But it will not be a place that we'll call home for quite a long time.
So in a nutshell, it's a matter of time.
It's definitely a matter of time. Okay. It depends. It depends how fast we develop, and we're doing this pretty fast right now.
Let's hope for the best.
Let's hope for the best. Let's hope we do not kill each other over space.
Yeah, let's hope all this like new space race won't cause any troubles in international security.
Let's hope it will be
peaceful,
cooperative, and peaceful.
So thanks for listening to us.
Thank you for today's show.
We hope you enjoyed this show, and subscribe to our channels on whatever platform you're listening to us. Rate us on every platform, and see you next year.
See you next year.
Happy Christmas
and